Hello, I'm Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of Winona. Today I'm standing outside the gates of the Woodlawn Cemetery. Since 1862, there have been 27,000 Winonans buried at the cemetery, and I'm sure there's an interesting story under each and every one of these grave sites. Today we're going to see some of the history come alive at the 3rd annual Cemetery Walk sponsored by the Winona Historical Society. I'm currently standing with Janelle Moore, who's one of the organizers of this wonderful event at the cemetery. Hi, Janelle. Welcome to the Spirit of Winona.
Thanks for coming out.
Of course. Janelle, tell me, what is happening here today?
Well, today we have the 3rd annual Cemetery Walk, and it's where we portray historical characters, and we try to bring to life some of the people that lived in Winona. And this year being the sesquicentennial, we thought it would be fun to have most of our characters be from that very early historic period of our town, so that people could actually get to meet the people that started this town and lived here. We try to make them seem real, try to bring them some history, but also make them seem like real people.
Okay, and who is the event being sponsored by? Tell me about that.
Okay, it's sponsored by the Winona County Historical Society, and this is our 3rd year. We've had wonderful turnout, wonderful support. This year there's about 40 actors involved in portraying the characters. We have everything from soldiers to families and all types of a broad range of characters from the early history of Winona.
Tell me about the first 2 people now. I know they're not buried in the cemetery, but tell me your purpose of having the first 2 characters.
Well, this year we decided we wanted to have the Johnsons because they were the first people to stake claims in Winona. And so the Johnsons, we thought would be nice to have them meet the people and tell them about the history of Winona and how they staked the claims and so forth. So even though they're not buried there, they're such an important part of the history, we wanted to include them.
I was the first one to stake claims here. Well, actually, okay, I staked the claim for myself, but part of the claim was for Captain Orrin Smith of the steamer Nominee. He saw all these little towns springing up along the Mississippi River from Galena, Illinois, all the way to St. Paul, Minnesota, and he saw the potential here because this little area had 2 good landings for steamboats. And it turns out that he was right. It was a good site for a town.
He certainly was. A lot smarter than that old Willard Bunnell. He didn't want to live on a sandbar. Oh, no. Not until later when he saw how nice it was.
Hold on, Abigail. We'll get to that soon enough. Now, I was a carpenter for Captain Smith, and on October 15th of 1851, Captain Smith dropped me off to stake claims. And what we did was he sent me off with 2 other woodcutters and some oxen and some lumber, and we had food and supplies. He let us off at 10 o'clock at night.
We weren't even married then. In fact, I didn't even know Irwin then.
That's true.
But he told me all about how when they first landed, the very next day, they built a little shanty and started out to set claims.
Yes, that's true. And by November, there were others that were coming up from La Crosse because they wanted to stake claims too. So what we did, we negotiated a little bit. We took the riverfront and broke it up into 6 different parcels, 6 different claims that were a half-mile square. I got to choose the first one for myself, but the second one I chose for the captain.
They barely got their shelters built for themselves and the oxen before winter came. And often the Indians would come to visit. They had a burial ground right nearby.
Yes. All of us that were there started building right away and started cutting lumber. In fact, the Indians had 4 large buildings down by the river that were on raised platforms where they could sleep. I took a long trip, a real cold trip actually, on December 4th and went down to La Crosse because I needed to hire a couple more men. I hired Ellen Gilmore and George Wallace. Well, on the way back, we were canoeing, and the water was freezing on the bow of the canoe. It was getting pretty serious. Well, we found a little cabin down by Dakota, Minnesota, that was owned by Nathan Brown, and he wasn't home, but he had stocked it with firewood and a lot of food, and so we took over the joint, and we cooked some food. We had a great time, and it saved our life. We would have frozen if it wasn't for that.
And then I'd never have met you, Irwin.
Well, that's true. The 6 of us bachelors, we got together and actually spent Christmas and New Year's together, and we ate like kings, I'll tell you. You haven't lived until you've had squirrel pot pie. And you know, George Wallace, he was a good friend of mine, he actually staked a claim behind the lake here, Lake Winona, and you're standing on it right now. The claim that he had turned out to be Woodlawn Cemetery.
Tell them about that awful Willard Bono man. Can you believe he wanted my husband's claim? Built a little shanty right on his land. Yeah,
well, but I tore down that shanty as soon as he disappeared.
Yes, but then Bono returned and beat up my Irwin.
Yeah.
And they wounded him severely and tore down his shanty.
I had to stay with some neighbors while I rebuilt my shanty. But eventually, one of my buildings became a hotel. And many people used it because there were a lot of people coming up wanting to get land. And they were starting to stake claims. So we were busy.
Tell them how we met Irwin.
Well, that was the winter of 1853. I stayed with a family by the name of Evans. John Evans, to be specific.
And that was my father. Didn't take us long before we knew each other and got married.
That's true.
But life was hard then, wasn't it, dear?
Yeah.
There were many claim jumpers all over. Isaac Simon tried to steal our claim, but my Irwin put a stop to that. He shot him through the arm during a fight.
Well, now wait. I don't want this to spread. I did it accidentally. The gun went off. I mean, he could have been shot someplace else besides the arm. But it did go off, and the sheriff wouldn't believe me. He actually chased after me. I disappeared into the hills and went to La Crosse, Wisconsin for a little while, laid low, and then came back eventually, and no one bothered me after that. I wanted this place to be named Montezuma. You remember that?
I certainly do.
But they never listened to me. Montezuma, Minnesota. It had a ring to me. But they named it Winona. That's what they did.
And so did we, after all. We named our daughter Winona.
That's true. Our daughter was Winona, but our hotel was called the Johnson House. This place has really changed over the years, dear.
It certainly has.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Enjoy your day. And say hello to our friends here when you meet them.
Yeah.
My name is George Washington Clark, and I'm one of the original founders of Wabasha Prairie, which is now known as Winona. I was born in New York in 1827, and I come from a family of fighters and soldiers, but I'm not much of a fighter, as you'll find out later. But my great-grandfather fought in the Revolutionary War and the French Indian War. And my grandfather fought in the Revolutionary War at the age of 15, and my dad fought in the War of 1812. Well, in 1851, I left New York and decided to travel west to find a place to live. And I came out here by every means of transportation you can think of. I came out by steamship and railroad and horses and hiking and canoe, and ended up in La Crosse, Wisconsin. They were going to make that into the Chicago of the West. And that was too many people for me. So I decided, I heard of a fellow by the name of Irwin Johnson, who was the sole settler up in Wabasha Prairie. So a friend of mine, Silas Stevens, and I decided to take a steamer up to see if we could find Irwin and see what this land was like, and possibly homestead. Well, it was in November of 1851 when Silas and I took the steamship up, and we got off on a dark November night, and we had trouble finding his cabin, and when we finally did find it, we had trouble getting in, but he let us stay. Well, the next morning I looked out and I saw the river and I saw the woods and I saw Wapasha's Brow, which is now Sugarloaf, and I decided this is where I wanted to stay. You could have a half-mile claim, half-mile square with a half-mile on the river. And there were 6 of us, and as I said, I wasn't much of a fighter, so I ended up with claim number 6. We also decided that you could have a claim for a relative or a friend, so I staked another claim for my brothers. Well, I made a mistake. I built my cabin on my brother's claim, and when I was building my cabin, a fellow by the name of John Evans claim jumped my original claim. We had formed a group called the Wabasha Protection Club to protect all the rights of settlers And so the club and I went down and talked to John Evans to see if we couldn't get my claim back. But John Evans was flashing a gun around and threatened to shoot any of us if we tried to get it from him. So, not fighting, I left him alone. But the next year my brothers came out and we offered him $300 in 1851 to buy my own claim back. He still refused it, so we left him alone. One brother moved back to New York and the other brother died in 1854, and he's buried right here. I got married in 1857 to Jenny Lockwood, and Jenny and I had 7 children, 3 boys and 4 girls. And we built our house on a street that they named after me, Clark's Lane. And we built the house on Clark's Lane and what's now Lake Boulevard. And that house stood until the 1950s before it was torn down. And it just shows that I was a respected citizen in the community, had a street named after me, and you didn't have to be a fighter to have a street named after you.
You see that monument up there? How you like it? You think it's pretty? Well, I think so. Can you believe I paid $1,000 for that? Way back in early 1900s. You see those flowers up there beside it? I paid $500 for those flowers for my grave forever. I'm called Mr. Stovall now. I earned that title for all the hard work and thrift I've done in my life. Once I was called boy, servant, even slave. My father, he was rich, a rich plantation owner, and my master. That was in 1837. My mother was also a slave in the house business of my father. But my father was a big-hearted man, though. He loved his kids, and I love my father, too. My mother, who taught me lots of skills, hair cutting, shaving, weaving, and how to cook. A talent that would serve me well in my life. I went with my father to the Civil War and actually believed the South was right. One Sunday, I was given permission to go to church across the Union lines. But I never went back, though. Joined the Union Army, a regiment from Chicago, got my belly full of fighting. After the war, I found myself a free man and realized what the war was all about. I earned $2.50 a week and free room and board. But back then, I felt like I was rich. I was the richest man in the world. In 1877, I came to hear wonderful Winona. When I lay eyes on the hills, the rivers, and the cliffs, I suddenly fell in love. I opened my own restaurant in a building down on 76 West 2nd. Only charged 25 cents a meal. Can you believe that? All other restaurants said I was starved. But after 7 years, I bought the block next door. I bought the next door building to that. Later, I even bought the building I was in. Can you believe that? A former slave owned 3 blocks of building. And the building my restaurant was called the Stovall Dining Hall. Life has been good to me. Even though I never married, I had respect of one of the best restaurants in town. Only real sadness, though, for this whole grateful life I'm thankful for, my brother disappeared. We never really got real close. We done been here in Winona for a couple of years. I hope you guys remember me as a free, proud man who made his dream come true here in Winona.
Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells. In the silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy menace of their tone. Are you familiar with those poetic lines from the macabre work, The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe? Well, those lines could not possibly more clearly express my exasperation at the Central Methodist Church bells, every Sunday morning from 10 to 10:30, and again in the evening from 7 to 7:30, when our sacred thoughts should be privately and personally contemplated, I must be punished by the auditory pain of out-of-tune bells whose clanging disturbs the peace and the quiet of the Sabbath. How could I, Mrs. Seymour Brown, possibly allow such a practice to continue? My husband was the late Seymour Brown, the Seymour Brown Jr., and he would be very proud to know that I have submitted a complaint to the Central Methodist Church Board. Now, I own the brick house across the street from the church at the corner of Broadway in Maine. As a rental property owner, I find the ringing of those bells more than just annoying. Why, it is most objectionable because it detrimentally affects my ability to rent and to sell my property. Why, several times prospective purchasers and renters have objected to the clanging of those bells so near at hand. Now, I will allow that from afar it might be all right, but up close, that clanging is most objectionable. Therefore, I have every hope that my petition might be granted. My husband, the late Seymour Brown, may he rest in peace, would be proud that I am so prudently exercising my business skills in the business world. Seymour was a noted capitalist, you know. Seymour's father was Seymour Brown Sr., and Seymour Sr. operated Winona's most successful boot and shoe companies. This was in the 1860s and 1870s, and it was known as the S.W. Brown Company. Now, unfortunately, my husband's father died quite young, but he left my husband, who was his only child, a very substantial inheritance. My Seymour, of course, made the most of his intellectual gifts. He graduated from law school at the young age of 20, and he went on to become a partner in the respected firm of Gale and Brown. Now, eventually, my husband did quit practicing law to concentrate on managing our business and our property interests. Why, my husband worked tirelessly for the citizens of this community. He was very dedicated to the industrial growth and advancement of our peoples. Why, he worked as the director of the Fidelity Building Savings and Loan Association, and he also worked with the Mississippi River Improvement Association. Unfortunately, our married life was all too short and it was childless. We were married in 1900 at the home of my sister, Mrs. George Bingham, in Williams Street. We had 10 years of devotion to each other before, my husband Seymour became Winona's first fatality from lumpy jaw, a condition that is directly caused by the eating of infected beef. However, I have determined to carry on his reputation for good works in this community, and I am quite certain that were he alive today, in 1917, my husband would support my complaint against the ringing of those bells. I have just learned that an edict has been issued and that the pastor and the church board have denied my complaint. This is what the pastor said to me. Mrs. Brown, you stand alone in your complaint against the chimes. The citizens of Winona unanimously desire that the chimes should continue to ring now as in the past. Well, I wonder what my Seymour would say about that. Now, you may wonder, you may think it strange, given my devotion to my husband, that I am not laid to rest beside him in his tomb. Why, you might ask? Well, look at this fearsome place, with its underground entombment and its cold iron bars on the door. Why, certainly it must have been the inspiration for Edgar Allan Poe and his gruesome Gothic tales from the crypt. Why, I even understand, and it's just a rumor you understand, that there is a legend in this town that my husband's name, S.W. Brown, means Satan worship Brown. I shudder to be buried in such a place. No, I would much prefer to lie under the stars and the trees and to have the snow fall softly on my grave. But do you know that even there in my peaceful grave, on dark and still nights, I can still sometimes hear them. The tolling, the moaning, the groaning, the chiming of those bells.
Hello, my name is Mildred Goodman. I am 6 years old, and this is my older sister, Edith. I did not pull Edith's hair no matter what she says.
Yes, you did pull my hair. She's always pestering me and never missed doing anything wrong.
Now, Edith, your sister was just trying to get your attention.
Well, it hurts when she tries to get my attention. Make her stop.
Girls, stop carrying on like this. What are these people going to think about us?
They're going to think that I did not pull Edith's hair.
Daddy.
Both of you, settle down and start behaving like young children. Hi, I'm Stephen Goodman, and we're happy to see you, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
We are.
We're going to tell you a little bit about our lives in Winona today.
I was very young when we came here.
I was younger.
We came to Winona in about 1880, shortly after the Civil War had ended, because of my new position as conductor on the Winona and St. Peter Railway.
Tell them where you went, Daddy.
Well, when we came here, the Winona and St. Peter Railway had just begun its expansion out west. They were buying up all sorts of railroads stretching from the Mississippi River through Stockton, St. Charles, Rochester, Waseca, Mankato, and all the way to the Dakota border.
That's a long way.
It certainly is. As conductor, of course, I was in charge of the whole operation. We would sometimes take stone and lumber from here in Winona out to the western towns where they would give us grains and wheat to bring back for the people of Winona.
Being a conductor was a very important job.
Daddy was the boss of the train.
Oh, Mildred pinched me.
I did not pinch Edith no matter what she says.
On the train, of course, people minded me. They did what I told them to do. There's two little girls I know who could learn a good lesson from being told what they're supposed to do. Isn't that right, Mildred?
Yes, Daddy.
You too, Edith.
But she pinched me.
Now, tattling is not behaving, and I've had enough of this. Do you understand? Now, where was I? Oh, yes, that's right. We came to Winona shortly after my wife, their mother, passed away. It was just my two little girls and my son, Oscar. I didn't know what I was going to do because I had to be gone mostly every day because of my job being conductor. Luckily, my brother, who is also a worker on the Winona and St. Peter Railway as a baggage handler here at the Winona Depot, and his wife lived in town. So we moved in with them, and whenever I was at work, his wife watched the children.
We weren't in Winona very long.
I hardly remember.
Yes, it was shortly before Christmas of that same year that we moved here. The diphtheria epidemic was everywhere, and little children were especially vulnerable. Little Mildred went first about December 14th, and 4 days later Edith followed. It was a very sad Christmas.
Daddy stayed here for a while.
But then he moved.
That's right, I remarried, and shortly before 1886 the railroad moved me out west, where I was for many years.
But then he came back here.
To be with us.
Couldn't stay away from my darling little girls for very long now, could I?
No, sir.
I'm glad you came back, Daddy.
Ow, Mildred pulled my hair again. She really did.
Why, Edith, how could you say such a thing? I did not pull Edith's hair no matter what she says.
If you'll excuse me, I have a little parenting to do. There's two little girls I know of who are in need of a lecture.
Uh-oh. You're going to get it now, Edith.
I'm Rufus Gage. I was born in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, to a Quaker family. You say, wait a minute. Quakers are pacifists. They don't believe in war. What are you doing in a uniform? Carrying a sword. Well, when I was younger, my family left the Quaker church and joined the Methodist Episcopal Church. I had an older brother, A.W. Gage, who lived here in Winona. He and his wife came east in 1857 to tell us about how beautiful Winona was and what great opportunities there were for advancement. I said, A.W., can I go west with you? He said, well, sure. Come on. When we got to Winona, I found out A.W. was kind of an important person. He was an alderman, and he was on the water board. He and the water board were the ones that laid out how the water lines were going to be run and so on. Now, I know some of the lines have been improved, pipes wear out and so on, but it was A.W.'s board that laid the idea out. He also owned a lumber yard, and it was at that lumber yard that I trained to be a carpenter. I thought, hey, that's going to be better than being a farmer. So, from 1857 to 1862, I was a member of the Methodist Episcopal Church here in town and a carpenter. In 1862, Sioux uprisings took place. And because I had been trained as a Quaker early in my life, I didn't want to get involved. Quaker pacifism said, stay out of it. But then we began hearing stories of massacres. But we only heard about the Indian side. Anyhow, I said, I've got to get involved. So I joined the 2nd Minnesota Cavalry. That was Hatch's Battalion. That was the nickname for it. I was assigned to Company I. I was assigned to the frontier post. There were 4 of them. My job was to bring in resupplies of men, ammunition, food, and other supplies. And, when I wasn't doing that, ride patrol to make sure we kept the peace. Well, very early in 1865, I was mustered out of the Minnesota 2nd Cavalry as a corporal. But 1865, Civil War was still going on. And I couldn't take it. I'd been trained to use this thing. So I said I'm going to use it for my country. And I joined up with the Union Army. Now when I joined Hatch's Battalion, I got $75 as an enlistment bonus. When I signed up with the Union Army for the Civil War, I didn't get anything. But I was an experienced soldier. I knew how to use these things. So instead of going in as a corporal, I went in as a 1st sergeant. That was an increase in rank and an increase in pay. It was not a pleasant experience. I still get memories of the smoke, the noise of the cannons, rifles going off, the cries of the wounded that we couldn't get to, smell of the gunpowder. I was very happy when the Civil War ended later in the year 1865, and I was able to come home, go back to the Methodist Episcopal Church, and get back to my life as a carpenter. Well, I'd been back a little while, and it wasn't long before I met Adelia Hatch. Now, some people said she was related to the Hatch of Hatch's Battalion. There's the Oblisk, the Hatch family Oblisk. You can find any evidence one way or another there. You're welcome to look for it. Anyhow, Adelia and I were married in 1870. We were very happy together. Only blot in that happiness was we didn't have any children. So when she died in 1877, I was devastated. I got very busy as a carpenter, took as many jobs as I could, worked in the church. It wasn't long before I met Mary A. Brown from over Trempealeau way. And in 1883, we were married. Now people took one look at me and started pointing their fingers. They said, Rufus, you're 47. This is no time to begin a family. And maybe they were right, because life expectancy then was a whole lot shorter than it is now. But Mary and I didn't see it that way. We had 3 boys, and they were the joys of my life. Maybe you'd like to know some of the buildings I worked on here in town. Now, there was the first Methodist Episcopal Church. Of course, we've had a few fires, First Methodist. There was the first courthouse. That was a wooden structure. It was pretty much next to the one that we have now, which is solid stone. There was the first Madison School. And that was a wooden structure. It used to sit basically where the playground is now, the tarred area. And then they built the other bigger school later. There was the Republican block in the city of Winona. And there was the first Choate building, which was a wooden building. It has been replaced now by the stone building that stands there. But people liked the work I did as a carpenter. When I died in 1904, the Republican Herald, which was the forerunner of the Winona Daily News, ran my obituary. And they mentioned Mary, the 3 boys, my military record. But they didn't mention Adelia. I am sorry about that.
Excuse me. I'm so glad you came by. I was just on my way to the Sportsman's Club to shoot some trap. But I suppose I could spend some time with you first. Oh, do you know what? I just learned that the Sportsman's Club is not down where it was when I was shooting. There's some golf course there now in the west end of Winona. What would that be? Westfield. That's right. I was national trap shooting champion 2 years in a row, 1922 and 1923. And then I was international trap shooting champion. My name is in the Hall of Fame? Oh, I didn't tell you my name, did I? Oh, sorry. I'm Grace Watkins King. I live here now. J.R. Watkins was my father, and he grew up in a very poor household. His father was a minister. My father grew up always hungry, always wanting. And he vowed that he would get out of there and make something of himself and become rich. He started out in a barn in Plainview, Minnesota. Well, you know, if you want to be internationally famous, Plainview is not exactly a good base of operation. You know what I mean? I was born there, and when I was a little child, we moved here to Winona. Because here, what did we have? We had a river with ships bringing all sorts of wonderful things on it. And we had 5 railroad companies spanning the entire country. Of course, farmers can't come to a store all the time. They're very busy people, and the only way to get around is by horse and buggy. But they had cows to milk. They couldn't be leaving all the time, so J.R. went to them. And he sold them liniment. And then he understood, by talking to the farm wives, that there were all sorts of things that he could sell them that they wanted and they couldn't get, that you could only get in the city. He wanted to bring them exciting things. He wanted to bring them cocoa, coffee, pepper, oregano, cloves. But these things are only to be found in Asia and South America. So you have to bring them here. He brought them here, he packaged them, and he put them in buggies. And he had so many customers, he had to hire more people to drive the buggies. All over this country, selling things to farmers that they couldn't get anywhere else. At a point, you know that you can't do it all yourself. So he was looking for someone to take over the business. So my father called upon my cousin Paul. Father enticed Paul and his new wife Florence to come out here by building them a wonderful house. I suppose you've seen it. It's on 7th Street, right across from Central School. It's a beautiful, big brick building, furnished with Carrara marble floors and pillars, antique French stained glass windows. He had the best hardwoods from this whole forested area cut for him for this house. He had the best craftsmen from all over, and especially from the east end of Winona, come in and carve that wood into beautiful, beautiful things. Anyway, what was left for poor little Grace to do? I suppose I could sit around with my mother and tat, and I could have tea with my mother's friends. But I didn't want any of that. You know what I wanted? I wanted adventure. Back then, I needed a husband. And I got him. I married for love, and I loved that man every minute we spent together. It was a wonderful life. E.L. King sold typewriters door to door. Of course, it horrified my father. A door-to-door typewriter salesman for Grace Watkins. My father, of course, said, E.L., we can't have you out selling typewriters door to door. I'm afraid you'll have to come to work for us downtown. My father remarried, moved away, died under rather mysterious circumstances, as often happens with second wives, you know. And E.L. and Paul just duked it out to see who was going to be on top. Well, poor Paul. He died. Who's that leave? E.L. Very good. Anyway, E.L. ran the company and I helped him. I had a good head for business. I was on the board of directors of Watkins Company. I was also on the board of directors of our bank. I had 2 children, E.L. Jr., whom we called Bud, and my lovely little Mary L. She's buried right over there. we built a beautiful home down past Homer, called it Rockledge, designed by Mr. Maher, the same man who designed the Watkins Company offices building and the bank, the King Bank. We just called it our bank, but now it's Winona National. We wanted to show people all these things that were available around the world. So we went to Africa twice. We had the animals that we shot stuffed and brought back, given to natural history museums, and also down at the bank. If you ever go down there, you can see some of the animals that I shot myself. I shot a lioness by mistake. We didn't like to do that. We don't like to make mistakes, of that nature at least. And she had 3 cubs, 3 babies. Well, I couldn't leave them there. They would have been eaten by predators or died some sort of horrible death. So I brought them home with me. E.L. learned that he was a wizard with real estate. Did I tell you this? Did I tell you we bought property in Florida? Because if it weren't for me and for E.L., there would be no Daytona 500. Then we went out to bought lake property out in Lake Tahoe. Have you heard? Then we went to Hawaii. Now, how many people do you imagine were traveling to Hawaii in the 30s? 2, me and E.L., because we're the only ones that had any money. Country was in a huge depression. No one had any money except us. And do you know how we had that money? Have you ever heard of prohibition? And guess what's in liniment? Alcohol, of course. People found that they could drink this. Of course, there's also a teeny bit of natural alcohol in vanilla, not the sort you get now. And certainly there's not the alcohol in the liniment that you get now either. They did pass a few laws after that, you know. But we made money. We made money when no one else was making money. My dear E.L. died in 1940. Left me a widow for 35 years. I'm glad that the money not only made a wonderful life for me and our children and our grandchildren, but for people in Winona. We gave them jobs. We gave them wonderful architecture. We're not involved with the company anymore, but we still have a name and a presence here.
Lucy Warren, and this is my husband, Charles. He was the first conductor on the train, on the first passenger train in Ohio that went from Toledo to Cleveland.
And I was the first conductor on the first passenger train in Winona on the Winona-St. Peter Railroad. Yep. In December 29th, 1871, I took Old Tiger, that's what we called her, the locomotive, Old Tiger. I took her to Stockton on the first passenger trip. I remember that journey well.
Oh, I do too, Charles. I remember, just think, we were all so proud to have a railroad from Winona to Stockton.
Yep. That was, everything had to start somewhere, and I remember we brought back a load of wheat from Stockton, so it worked both ways. That railroad, the Winona-St. Peter, was supposed to go to the bend of the Minnesota River, the Great Bend up at St. Peter.
Well, why would they go to St. Peter? There's a lot more fun places to go than that, I think.
Yeah, Lucy, but at that time they believed St. Peter was going to be the state capital, so they enlarged the streets and expanded the town and got her all ready. But then the Chicago Northwestern bought out the railroad, and it just didn't happen. The railroads took over as the major means of transportation because it used to be the steamboats.
Oh, the steamboats. I remember the steamboats. It was so exciting when they would come to town. You know, boys and girls, there were over 1,300 steamboats that came to Winona in 1 year.
The cities that didn't have the railroad connections, like St. Peter didn't get, they kind of withered away and didn't become as important in the industry. In 1854, several Winona businessmen got together and formed the Transit Railroad Company, and it started up good, and the government gave 4.5 million acres of land to the railroad companies to build tracks on, and the state of Minnesota loaned them $5 million. In 1857, that was a lot of money, but it wasn't enough. They had to start selling stock to investors. Yeah, you got it, Lucy. In 1858, the Depression came and the railroad company went bankrupt. So the state had to buy up all the assets, and they formed the Winona St. Peter Railroad then, which later became the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. They had steamboats that were brought the railroad cars in to bring them across the river, and Old Tiger was mine, and that's what we took to Stockton on that famous trip with the passengers.
Well, how did they get across the river, and where did they go?
Well, I'll tell you, Lucy, that was the problem. A lot easier in the winter than in the summer, because in the summer they had to ferry the passengers and the cargo across the river, and that was a pretty slow process. Well, in the winter it was easier because we'd put tracks out across the ice. In fact, we'd build that ice and snow up so high that they could drive a team of horses and a wagon right underneath in the bridges we built in the snow and ice.
Whoa, I wouldn't want to be on the train or the team of horses.
Well, the railroad company, they were pretty careful. They got them tracks off the ice before it melted.
Oh, well, I'm not so sure about that. There was one train that even fell in the river.
Well, Lucy, that's right. That bridge tender didn't do his job. They didn't have them tracks aligned right. It couldn't have been the fault of the conductor.
Guten Tag.
Guten Tag und willkommen.
Good day and welcome.
How nice to see you all today.
My name is Jonas. This is my wife, Anna Maria Sophia, and my daughters, Maria and Anna.
We are some of the members of the Peter family.
In case you couldn't tell, we came here from Germany.
As farmers in Pleasant Valley, we found that the Winona area looked very much like home. The rolling hills and farmlands look very much like our homeland.
Ah, but circumstances here were a lot different than where we came from. You see, in a place like Winona, you can follow your dreams.
We led much different lives in Germany.
Never assume that people are who you think they are.
You might be surprised.
We moved here in about 1870. Is that right, Schnitzel?
Yes, we moved here in 1870, but we had led lives of privilege in Germany when we were young.
I was a palace guard for the Royal Regiment, a soldier to the king.
And I was the daughter of a baroness and a lady-in-waiting in the royal court.
Mama and Papa were royal.
Not quite royal, Anna. You see, a daughter of nobility couldn't marry someone who was not, so we came here.
They were as close to royalty as you would find here in Winona.
Now remember, kids, you never know who you might meet in a town with as many different people as Winona. You never can tell.
Many people came from Germany at about the same time we did, due to the bad economy, and they wanted to avoid joining the military.
We brought many of our customs and our language with us. We even had our own community called the Third Ward.
And almost 1/3 of the population of Winona was German. So that made the move much nicer for us.
We had German schools and churches.
St. Martin's, where everything was in our language.
German bands played concerts right on the street corners.
It was so much fun to go to town.
And Boob's Brewery made great German beer.
Our new life here brought us many new experiences.
Living and farming out in the country introduced us to the American Indians.
They didn't speak German.
But they did use sign language, which helped us to trade and communicate with them.
We would trade flour for pelts and furs.
Flour for fish.
And flour for arrowheads.
We were lucky we were farmers. You see, with all the trading going on, flour was hard to come by.
One of the things we could not trade flour for was the medicines you have today.
The sicknesses and the epidemics that could not be stopped were terrible.
Anna, Maria, and I all contracted typhoid fever in the same year.
It was horrible. There was no way to stop it.
It was so sad. After my wife and daughters died, our family would never be the same.
And after the epidemic, when we died, my papa moved into town.
I didn't know what to do, but I knew I had to do something useful.
So Papa went from being a farmer to a milkman.
That's right. I thought, who a better milkman than me? Someone who knows more about the business end of a cow.
Oh, Papa.
For the next 30 years, Jonas survived as a Winona milk dealer. Every day he would take his cart with milk and ice and go around the community.
He raised the rest of our brothers and sisters.
And we never forgot what he taught us.
You never know who you might meet.
They might be German.
They might be royalty.
They might have had exciting adventures.
But whoever they are and wherever they may be from, they are the people that make up your hometown.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
This has been Joyce Woodworth with Voices from the Past at the Woodlawn Cemetery. Please join me again next week. Till then, enjoy the Spirit of Winona.